You know, usually when we talk about a medical diagnosis, there's this expectation of absolute precision, right? Like it feels almost like an engineering problem.
Oh, absolutely, yeah. You break your arm, you go to the hospital, and they take an X-ray.
Right. And the X-ray just shows that stark, jagged white line right across the bone. And the doctor points at the film and says, there is the fracture. It's a physical reality that's captured perfectly on a screen.
It provides a really profound sense of comfort, honestly. Because we are, incredibly biased toward the visual, when a really complex, messy problem gets reduced to a clean image or a simple metric, we feel this massive sense of control. We assume the diagnostic tool is telling us the complete truth.
Yeah, but then you step into other disciplines like neurodevelopment or, complex systemic autoimmune diseases, and suddenly that X-ray machine is just totally useless. The whole diagnostic landscape becomes incredibly murky.
Right, you're suddenly treating symptoms without actually seeing the underlying structural damage.
Exactly. And what is absolutely wild to consider today is that this exact same illusion of precision, that false comfort of looking at a clean, high-definition diagnostic dashboard, is happening right now in the very center of global enterprise finance.
It's a phenomenal parallel because corporate executives, they're looking at these stunning digital interfaces. They're watching millions of dollars flow in real time, seeing all the green check marks align on their screens, and they just assume the underlying mathematical structure of their supply chain is completely sound.
Yeah, but it might not be. So welcome to the deep dive. Today, our mission is highly specific and, frankly, incredibly urgent. We're going hunting for a hidden mathematical parasite.
A parasite that is actively eating away at enterprise supply chain margins, and it's doing it completely undetected by the very people whose entire job is to protect those margins.
Right. So we've custom-tailored this deep dive for you, the listener, to step directly into the mindset of a chief financial officer, a CFO, at a massive global enterprise. But honestly, even if you are just insanely curious about the hidden physics of corporate finance, how money actually moves through the pipes of the global economy, you are really going to want to hear this.
Absolutely. And to map out this hidden architecture today, we're pulling from a really fascinating stack of source material. We are starting with an industry analysis piece from CFO Dive, authored by Doug Seberg, which gives us this critical historical framework.
Yeah, that piece was super helpful. It outlines the 4 maturity stages of accounts payable, right?
Exactly. It explains, step by step, how we actually arrived at this current moment of just blind trust in digital interfaces.
And to figure out how to break that blind trust, we are blending that historical framework with a highly provocative, frankly contrarian manifesto written by a data architect named Prasad Bond.
Right. He exposes this mechanism that he calls the interchange inflation trap. And it's pretty explosive.
It really is.
Yeah.
And just to keep things balanced, we're also layering in an industry perspective from the publication PCN, which mounts a very rigorous logical defense of the exact financial technologies that Bond is basically tearing down.
Which I love because it creates a perfect tension. You have the established industry narrative on one side, and then a rogue data architect pointing out a massive structural flaw on the other.
It's the perfect setup. So let me set the scene for you right now. You are the CFO. You have just spent millions of dollars installing a massive state-of-the-art, completely digitized accounts payable platform. You've ripped out all the old clunky systems. You have modernized.
You're feeling pretty good about it.
Oh, you're feeling great. And then the fintech vendor who sold you this magnificent platform, they offer you a secondary deal. They look at your billions of dollars in procurement spending and they say, hey, if you pay your core suppliers using our proprietary virtual credit cards, we will actually give you a 1% cashback rebate on every single transaction.
Which, when you are operating at an enterprise scale, say you have $2 billion in annual procurement, a 1% rebate is $20 million of found capital.
$20 million, just appearing out of nowhere.
Right. It is an astronomical figure to just drop onto a balance sheet for doing basically nothing.
It is an absolute career maker. I mean, your finance department pops champagne, the board of directors starts treating your executive team like your quantitative savants who have somehow extracted free money right out of the digital ether.
Because you've taken accounts payable, which is historically this sleepy, very expensive cost center, a basement office filled with metal filing cabinets, and you've turned it into a massive revenue generator.
Exactly. On the corporate ledger, it just looks like pure, undisputed profit.
And here's the terrifying reality. By accepting that 1% rebate, you just unknowingly authorized a permanent 3% price hike on all of your raw materials.
Wow. Let that sink in.
The math becomes utterly brutal the absolute moment you look beneath the surface of that clean digital dashboard.
And that is exactly what we are going to do today. In this deep dive, we are going to show you exactly how to identify hidden interchange inflation in existing accounts payable ledgers.
We're going to break down the sheer physics of how that money moves and literally quantify the net financial loss.
Yes, and most importantly, we are going to walk you through a step-by-step API auditing playbook so you can actually get that capital back. But I think to understand how highly intelligent, rigorously trained finance professionals fall into this trap, we have to start by looking at the sheer physical pain of how businesses used to pay their bills.
We do, and the CFO dive analysis breaks this down perfectly into 4 stages of maturity. Stage 1 is categorized as paper check pragmatism.
Which, I mean, when you hear stage 1, it sounds entirely antiquated. It sounds like something straight out of the 1980s.
It does, but you have to understand the physical reality of regional business. Because even today, if you look at certain mid-market players like regional construction firms, specialized healthcare providers, or hospitality groups, they still rely heavily on paper checks. And there is a very, very pragmatic reason for that.
I imagine it has a lot to do with friction.
Yeah.
Or actually avoiding IT friction.
Precisely. Sending a paper check requires literally zero IT integration. You do not need 2 complex software systems to talk to each other. You open a commercial bank account, you order secure paper stock, your accounting software prints the amount, and an executive physically signs it with a pen. It is completely tactile.
But wait, from the supplier side, isn't it an absolute nightmare to receive a paper check? Like they have to physically take it to a bank, wait for it to clear.
Oh, it's terrible for the supplier. But from the perspective of the paying company, the enterprise, you avoid the immense liability of what's called supplier enablement.
Supplier enablement. Okay, what is that exactly?
Well, if you want to transition a mom-and-pop lumberyard, for example, to electronic payments, you have to call them. You have to obtain their secure bank routing numbers. You have to store that highly sensitive data on your own servers.
Oh, I see.
And if your servers get breached, you are legally liable for the compromise of their financial data. So for a stressed-out accounts payable clerk whose only goal is to just get invoices paid before the late fees trigger, sticking a piece of paper in a stamped envelope is simply the path of least resistance.
I can completely see the appeal of the simplicity there. But you obviously cannot run a modern billion-dollar enterprise on envelopes and stamps.
Yeah.
Eventually, that physical infrastructure just collapses under its own weight.
Right. If you acquire 3 smaller companies, suddenly you aren't writing 500 checks a month, you are writing 10,000 checks, which pulls us directly into stage 2, which they call dabbling.
Dabbling.
Yeah.
That sounds not very strategic.
Dabbling is the exact right term because there is no grand strategy here at all. It is highly, highly reactive. As the enterprise grows, its leverage over suppliers sometimes shifts. Or, more accurately, the enterprise starts working with massive institutional suppliers who hold all the power.
Right, like a global vendor who won't put up with paper checks.
Exactly. A major raw materials vendor, say, a huge global steel distributor, will simply send a formal notice saying, "We are no longer accepting paper checks. It takes too long to clear. You must pay us electronically."
So they dictate the terms of engagement.
Yes. And the internal AP team panics because they have no unified system for electronic payments. So they start building separate, disconnected workflows. They set up manual ACH transfers. Now, ACH, the automated clearinghouse, is an incredibly important concept here that we need to understand.
Okay, let's define ACH, because that term gets thrown around a lot.
It's basically a direct ledger-to-ledger electronic transfer system. It essentially tells Bank A to deduct funds and Bank B to credit funds, routing it all through a centralized national clearinghouse.
Okay, so the AP clerk is literally logging into a separate banking portal, typing in the steel distributor's routing number by hand and hitting send.
Yes, manually typing it in. Or perhaps the company's regional bank pitches them a corporate purchasing card to use for a few dozen key vendors. So what is the actual architectural reality of stage 2?
A mess, I'm guessing.
A total mess. You still have your legacy check printing workflow for the small vendors. You have a manual ACH upload workflow where someone is literally downloading a CSV file from the accounting software and uploading it into a bank portal. And you have a separate corporate credit card workflow. None of these systems communicate with each other. It is an infrastructure built entirely out of digital duct tape.
Which means it is incredibly fragile. And when it inevitably breaks, you descend into the absolute operational nightmare of Stage 3. Stage 3 is complexity and risk. The CFO dive piece paints a picture of Stage 3 that sounds like literal organizational quicksand.
Stage 3 is the breaking point for the executive team. This is the moment where the enterprise might be executing tens of thousands of payments globally every single month. And because they have likely grown through mergers and acquisitions over the years, they are not utilizing a single unified corporate bank account.
Wait, how many are they using?
They might be operating out of 150 different bank accounts across 20 different countries.
Oh my God. I am just trying to visualize the month-end reconciliation process for that, trying to match thousands of invoices to payments across 150 completely disconnected bank portals.
It induces absolute operational paralysis because they're running multiple incompatible ERPs. And for context, an ERP, an enterprise resource planning system, is supposed to be the central nervous system of the company. It tracks physical inventory, human resources, and financial ledgers.
Right, it's the brain of the company.
But if you acquire a company in Germany running SAP, and your headquarters in Chicago is running Oracle, those systems do not natively understand each other. The AP department is just drowning in data translation.
And because of that massive fragmentation, the CFO is flying totally blind. They have zero real-time visibility into the company's actual cash position. I mean, if the CEO walks in on a Tuesday and asks, hey, how much liquid capital do we have available across our European subsidiaries right now to fund a quick acquisition, the CFO might need a week just to aggregate the spreadsheets.
Exactly. And while the CFO is totally blind to their own liquidity, external threats are actively exploiting the chaos. Stage 3 is the era where cybersecurity vulnerabilities absolutely spike.
Right, because you have a fragmented system managed by exhausted, overworked human beings. That is a massive surface area for fraud.
Massive. We are no longer talking about the stage 1 fraud of someone stealing a physical check out of a mailbox and washing the ink with chemicals.
Yeah.
We are talking about highly sophisticated, digitally targeted attacks. And the most prevalent threat here is social engineering specifically. Business email compromise, or BEC.
Let me pause you there, because the mechanics of business email compromise are fascinating and also terrifying. It doesn't usually involve hacking the accounting software at all, does it?
No, not at all. It hacks the human.
Right.
The fraudster infiltrates the email server of one of your legitimate suppliers. They don't send anything right away. They wait silently. They watch the cadence of how you communicate with that supplier. They learn the language. And then, right when a massive invoice is due, they send an email from the supplier's actual email address. It says, "Hi team, we just updated our banking infrastructure. Please route this month's $2 million ACH payment to this new routing number."
And because the AP clerk is living in the chaos of Stage 3, frantically trying to clear thousands of invoices across disconnected systems, they don't have the time to pick up the phone and verbally verify the change. They just update the routing number in the portal and hit send.
Exactly. The funds clear through the automated clearinghouse and the money is gone, irretrievable. So if you put yourself in the shoes of the CFO living in Stage 3, your reality is basically defined by constant low-level terror. You have exorbitant operational costs, zero visibility into your own cash, and massive exposure to fraud. You are desperate for a lifeline.
Which creates the absolute perfect psychological conditions for someone to sell you a miracle. Enter the fintech savior. This brings us directly to Stage 4. Automated payments, the promised land.
Stage 4 represents the current pinnacle of industry modernization. The CFO realizes, okay, we cannot build this infrastructure internally. We don't have the IT talent. So they hire an outsourced electronic payments provider, basically a massive, specialized fintech platform.
And how does this platform actually work under the hood to solve that Stage 3 nightmare?
It essentially acts as an integration layer, using modern APIs, application programming interfaces, which simply allow different software systems to talk to each other securely. This fintech platform plugs directly into all your disparate ERPs and all your 150 bank accounts. It absorbs the chaos entirely and places a single, intuitive, beautifully designed web dashboard over top of it.
So from the perspective of the AP clerk, the 100 bank portals just vanish. They log into one screen.
One screen. The dashboard intelligently routes every single payment. It analyzes an invoice and automatically decides if it should be an international wire, an ACH transfer, or, and this is the really critical component for our deep dive, a virtual card payment. In a mature Stage 4 environment, upwards of 25% of all electronic payments might be routed through these virtual cards.
Wow, a quarter of all payments.
Yeah. Furthermore, the fintech vendor actually takes over the massive headache of supplier enablement. They employ their own call centers to contact your suppliers, obtain their banking information, and securely store it in their own encrypted vaults.
So they completely remove the legal liability from the enterprise. The AP team goes from performing grueling, error-prone manual data entry to essentially functioning as oversight. They just review the dashboard and click Approve.
Exactly. And here is the masterstroke. This is the mechanism that actually closes the deal in the boardroom. The fintech vendor looks at the CFO and says, not only are we going to solve your operational nightmare, mitigate your fraud risk, and give you real-time cash visibility, but for every single payment our algorithm routes through a virtual card, we are going to pay you a 1% rebate.
Let's stop right here. Because this is the exact psychological trap that Prasad Bon highlights in his manifesto. If you are that CFO and you've been living in the hellscape of Stage 3, you are bleeding money to inefficiency. A vendor comes along, offers you a pristine, secure system, and tells you they are actually going to pay you millions of dollars a year just to use it.
Right.
You don't view this as a software upgrade. You view this as the ultimate career victory. You have performed alchemy.
It feels like an undeniable structural victory for the finance team. They look like geniuses.
But I really want to introduce an analogy here. Because whenever something seems too good to be true in the world of finance, you have to look for the hidden friction. Imagine you are moving out of a dilapidated house with terrible leaking plumbing. You move into a brand new state-of-the-art smart home. The builder hands you the keys and says, by the way, not only is the plumbing fixed, but I am actually going to pay you 1% of your utility bill every single month for as long as you live here.
I mean, if a builder said that to you, your immediate reaction would not be gratitude. Your reaction would be profound suspicion.
Right. I am not signing that contract. I am looking for the hidden camera. I would immediately demand to know, wait, why? Where's that money actually coming from? You'd assume there is a catch. But in the corporate world, shrouded in the complexity of fintech jargon, CFOs just sign the contract, they pop the champagne. So I have to ask the obvious question. Why would the fintech pay the CFO? Where is that 1% rebate actually originating? Does the fintech just have a massive vault of charity capital?
And that single question, tracking the money back to its exact point of origin, is what completely shatters this entire illusion. It leads us directly into the physics of B2B payment friction. And it exposes Bond's concept of the interchange inflation trap.
Let's get right into the physics of it then. Let's trace the dollar, break down the actual mechanics of a virtual card or a V card payment.
To truly grasp this, we have to look at capital transfer through the lens of first principles thinking. In a pure, mathematically efficient system, transferring capital between two businesses should merely be a ledger-to-ledger movement. If my enterprise owes your supplier $100, my bank simply deducts $100 from my ledger, and your bank adds $100 to your ledger.
Which is the fundamental nature of an ACH payment, right? It is almost entirely frictionless.
Exactly. It's just data moving from one column to another. The actual cost to execute that digital movement is fractions of a penny. It requires very little external energy or capital to execute. But a virtual card introduces a massive intermediary protocol.
Okay, how so?
Well, it is not a direct ledger-to-ledger transfer. It utilizes the global commercial credit card networks, the massive rails built by entities like Visa or MasterCard. When the fintech dashboard decides to pay your supplier with a V card, it forces an external interchange fee onto the transaction.
Okay, and this interchange fee, who exactly is legally required to pay it?
The merchant who is receiving the money, in this case your supplier. And in the business-to-business, or B2B, ecosystem, this fee is extraordinarily high. It typically ranges between 2.5% and 3.5% of the total transaction volume.
Wow. Okay, I want to make sure I'm visualizing this correctly. Let's say I am the enterprise, and I owe my supplier exactly $100,000 for a massive shipment of industrial steel. I log into my beautiful Stage 4 dashboard, I see the invoice, and I click Approve. The system routes it via a virtual card. Does the supplier actually receive the $100,000 they are owed?
No. They receive roughly $97,000.
$3,000 just vanishes into the ether.
It doesn't vanish. The payment network intercepts the transaction and skims that $3,000 right off the top. The credit card network keeps a portion as their toll for using their rails, The bank that issued the virtual card keeps a portion. And they kick back a portion, that $1,000, which represents your 1% rebate to the fintech platform, who then passes it back to you, the CFO.
Oh, wow. So the CFO's brilliant free money is actually just capital forcibly extracted from the balance sheet of their own supplier.
Yes, the CFO is literally taxing their own supply chain. And this is exactly where Bond's thesis transitions from an interesting observation to a truly devastating critique, because you have to look at the unit economics of the supplier who is absorbing that hit.
Right, because if I go to a local cafe and buy a $5 latte with a credit card, the cafe absorbs the fee. They don't seem to care.
But look at the margins. A cafe might operate on a 70 or 80% gross margin on that latte. They can easily absorb a 3% credit card fee as a standard cost of doing business. It is a negligible hit to their overall profitability. But in the industrial B2B supply chain, the economics are entirely different.
How so?
We are talking about high-volume, highly commoditized components, raw materials like steel or aluminum, complex global logistics contracts, heavy manufacturing. These suppliers are not operating on 70% margins. They often operate on incredibly thin net profit margins. A 4 or 5% net margin is standard in many heavy industries.
Wow. I am seeing the math form in my head, and it is honestly alarming. If a steel supplier has a 5% net profit margin on a massive contract, and they suddenly have to eat a 3% interchange fee just to receive their payment.
You have just obliterated 60% of their total net profit on that specific contract. You have pushed them right to the brink of unprofitability.
They literally cannot survive that dynamic. I mean, if they absorb that fee across their entire client base, they go bankrupt.
Exactly. So they do not absorb it. A rational economic actor cannot absorb it. To protect their own operating margins, to keep their foundries running and their employees paid, they have absolutely no choice but to push that exact cost back onto the enterprise that forced the V card upon them.
But how do they do that? If I am the enterprise, I already negotiated the price of the steel. I signed a contract locking in the rate for the year.
Right, and the supplier will likely grind their teeth and eat the loss for the remainder of the current legally binding contract. But the moment that contract enters the renewal cycle, the moment you sit down to negotiate next year's volume, the supplier quietly, mathematically bapes that exact 3% interchange fee into their new baseline unit economics. The baseline price of the steel goes up by 3%. The cost of the logistics routing goes up by 3%.
That is incredibly insidious. So let's look at the ultimate mathematical reality for the CFO here. The enterprise executives believe they're winning because they see the 1% rebate hitting the ledger every month. But in truth, they are now paying 103% for their basic supply chain components.
Correct. The purchasing power of the enterprise has been severely degraded.
So let me get this straight. The accounts payable ledger records a 1% financial gain from the rebate check.
Yes.
Which means the net real-world result is a silent, permanent 2% capital hemorrhage across every supplier forced on the V-card network.
That is the textbook definition of the interchange inflation trap. The enterprise is literally paying the fintech vendor to erode its own purchasing power. They're funding the exact mathematical friction that is destroying their gross margins.
I want to extrapolate this because if you are a listener running a small business, a 2% leak might sound like an acceptable trade-off for a clean software interface and zero fraud. But place that 2% leak into the context of a massive global enterprise.
The scale of the destruction is catastrophic. Imagine a Fortune 500 manufacturing company that spends $2 billion a year strictly on procurement. A 2% net loss means $40 million is evaporating from their balance sheet and disappearing into the payment network every single year.
$40 million.
Yeah.
Just gone.
Over a 36-month period, that compounding effect completely neutralizes any strategic wins achieved by the procurement team.
That is a fascinating dynamic. You have a highly paid procurement team spending 6 months in grueling negotiations, leveraging global volume to secure a 1.5% discount on bulk aluminum. They pop champagne, they celebrate a massive win, and then the AP department, operating in a completely different silo, accidentally gives away 2% on the back end by routing the payment through a virtual card. The company actually lost money on the deal, but both departments think they succeeded.
It is a profound misalignment of incentives. But, I think we need to introduce a counter perspective here. We cannot view this entirely in a vacuum. If we look at the source material from PCN, the industry platform, they mount a very rigorous defense of virtual cards. They argue that this perception that suppliers are being universally harmed is actually a misconception.
Oh, right. I remember reading that. PCN makes a concerted effort to challenge the narrative that the interchange fee is purely parasitic. What exactly is their argument?
They argue that suppliers actually derive immense, quantifiable benefits from accepting virtual cards. First, they point to dramatic process efficiencies. When a V-card payment arrives, it comes with rich authorization data. This makes it incredibly easy for the supplier's accounts receivable department to reconcile the payment against a specific invoice. It eliminates hours of manual matching.
Okay, so it saves them some admin time. But crucially, they point to the speed of the money, right? PCN argues that V-cards offer instant settlement.
Exactly. The supplier gets paid immediately rather than waiting 30, 60, or even 90 days for a paper check to clear, or waiting for a complex international wire to navigate correspondent banks. The question PCN poses is, isn't that drastically improved cash flow, that access to immediate working capital, worth the 2.5 or 3.5% fee to the supplier? It is a very fair question, and PCN is not entirely wrong in their assessment of the utility. We have to reconcile these two opposing views. Instant settlement is highly valuable, but its value is entirely dependent on the specific business model of the supplier.
I think I see the distinction. If you are a rapidly growing software as a service vendor, or, say, a digital marketing agency operating with 60 or 70% gross margins, getting paid instantly is absolutely worth sacrificing 3%. It allows you to immediately reinvest that capital into customer acquisition. The fee is simply the cost of speed.
Exactly. The convenience fee logic holds up perfectly in high-margin environments. And this is the crucial distinction that Prasad Bond is making in his manifesto. We are not talking about software subscriptions. We're talking about the industrial supply chain.
Yep.
For a high-volume, low-margin industrial supplier, giving up 3% of their top-line revenue is mathematically devastating, regardless of how fast the money arrives.
Right. Fast money does not help you if the amount of money arriving is no longer sufficient to cover your own operating costs.
Precisely. The process efficiency of easier invoice reconciliation is nice to have, but it does not offset the absolute loss of fundamental profit margin. Therefore, the industrial supplier's only rational economic response is to inflate the baseline price. The PCN argument holds water for certain specific vendor categories, but when a CFO applies a blanket mandate to push all core supply chain vendors onto virtual cards, it triggers systemic, invisible inflation.
Okay, I follow the math perfectly. The financial argument for widespread virtual card adoption in heavy industry is essentially a massive self-inflicted leak for the enterprise. But let's shift the perspective back to the operational nightmare we discussed earlier. Remember stage 3. The CFO is losing sleep over ACH fraud and social engineering. Even if the V-card costs the enterprise 2% in margin, does it solve the security issues? Does the cybersecurity benefit of the stage 4 virtual card outweigh the financial hemorrhage? This brings us to what I think of as the cybersecurity paradox.
It is a deeply complex paradox. Synthesizing the CFO dive analysis regarding the rise in fraud with the PCN perspective on tokenization, we have to look closely at the architectural design of the virtual card itself as a defense mechanism.
PCN points out, quite accurately, that V-cards are incredibly secure by design because they're single-use tokens. Let's break down the mechanics of tokenization because it is a pretty brilliant piece of software engineering.
It is brilliant. When the AP system dashboard decides to pay an approved invoice, it does not transmit the company's main corporate credit card number. Instead, it interfaces with the bank's API and spins up a brand new, entirely unique 16-digit card number specifically for that single transaction.
But it doesn't just create a random number. It applies incredibly strict parameters to the token. It basically builds a digital fence around the funds.
Exactly. The card is programmed with inflexible rules. It is authorized for an exact dollar amount, down to the penny. If the invoice is for $14,206.12, the card will strictly decline any charge for $14,206.13. Furthermore, it is locked to a specific merchant category code, or often to the precise merchant ID of the supplier.
Wait, meaning it can only be spent at that exact store or vendor?
Right. You couldn't take it to Best Buy. And finally, it has a highly restricted temporal window. It might be programmed to expire in exactly 72 hours.
So if a hacker manages to intercept that 16-digit card number while it is in transit over the open network,
the stolen data is entirely useless to them. They cannot take that card number and buy a fleet of laptops because the token is mathematically locked to the merchant ID of a steel foundry. They cannot overcharge it to extract extra funds because the amount is capped to the penny. As a mechanism for transmitting funds over an open network, the tokenized V-card is arguably the most robustly secure method available.
But, and I feel like there is a massive but here, I am sensing that we are not actually eliminating the risk. We are merely shifting the risk profile somewhere else.
We are shifting it dramatically. The V-card itself, the token, is a highly secure vehicle. But an enterprise's reliance on heavy automation and third-party fintech intermediaries creates a dangerous new layer of opacity. Think back to the CFO dive article. In stage 3, the AP teams were drowning in data, but at least they were looking at the raw data. Now, in stage 4, they have outsourced all of that visibility to a third-party fintech walled garden.
Right. The CFO is looking at a beautiful, clean dashboard, but they no longer have any idea how the gears are turning underneath. The complexity has been entirely abstracted away.
And this abstraction leads to a very dangerous speculation regarding human behavior. If you build a system that perfectly stops the brute force interception of card numbers, what happens to the criminals? They evolve. They change their vector. The complex workflows of AP automation might inadvertently make social engineering attacks like business email compromise easier to execute, precisely because the employees blindly trust the automated dashboard.
Oh, wow. It is the lane assist phenomenon in modern cars. If you drive an older car, you are hyper-aware of the road because you are entirely responsible for keeping the car between the lines. But if you drive a highly automated modern car and it perfectly handles the lane assist and the adaptive braking, your brain just relaxes. You stop paying as much attention to the road. You trust the machine. If an AP clerk sees an invoice pop up in the beautiful, authorized fintech dashboard, their subconscious assumes the software has already vetted it for authenticity.
That is the exact psychological vulnerability. If a sophisticated fraudster can compromise the supplier's email system, they do not need to steal a V-card token. They just need to submit a fake but perfectly formatted invoice directly into the automated portal. The human AP clerk looks at the dashboard, sees the invoice matches the expected purchase order amount, and simply clicks Approve.
And the moment they click Approve,
the Stage 4 system functions flawlessly. It spins up a perfectly secure, uniquely tokenized V-card, and it perfectly securely delivers the company's funds directly into the fraudster's merchant account. The security mechanism worked exactly as designed, but it authorized a fraudulent premise.
you have secured the pipeline, but you have completely stopped checking the quality of the water you were pumping through it.
Exactly. The security benefits of the V-card are real when it comes to intercepting transmission, but they address the wrong vector entirely. They do not address the authorization logic in a socially engineered attack. And when you evaluate the entire system,
Which brings us to the most crucial, actionable segment of this deep dive, the API audit, the technical guide to detecting margin leakage. Because Prasad Bond does not just point out the theoretical problem. He provides a precise, step-by-step technical playbook for actually finding it. Let's break this down meticulously. If I am the listener and I want to act as a procurement margin auditor for my own massive company, what is the 48-hour actionable validation strategy? How do I actually prove this interchange inflation is happening in my existing accounts payable ledgers?
the absolute beauty of this intervention strategy is that it requires no external confrontation initially. You do not need to call the fintech vendor and argue with their sales team. You do not need to call your suppliers and accuse them of price gouging. You're simply going to force your own internal historical data to reveal the mathematical truth.
So what specific data points do we need to extract to build this diagnostic image?
You need 4 very specific elements to execute the audit. First, you need read-only API access to your corporate enterprise resource planning system, your core ERP ledger.
Let me clarify the read-only aspect. Why is that specifically important? I assume it is so the IT department doesn't have a panic attack thinking you are going to accidentally delete the payroll database.
Exactly. You are merely pinging the database to extract historical records. You are not writing or altering any operational data whatsoever. It is a zero-risk extraction.
Okay, got it. Read-only API access to the ERP. What's the second data point?
Second, you need historical line item pricing data for your top 10 enterprise suppliers.
Wait, why only the top 10? If we're looking for a systemic problem, shouldn't we pull the data for all 5,000 vendors?
Because you need to separate the signal from the noise. We do not care about the vendor who sells you paper clips or the local caterer. We want the heavy industrial suppliers, the steel providers, the logistics fleets, the chemical manufacturers that make up 80% of your total procurement budget. Those are the whales where the 2% leakage translates to millions of dollars.
That makes total sense. Go where the money is. What is the third data point?
Third, you need a rigidly defined 36-month timeline of that specific line item pricing data.
I am going to challenge the methodology here a bit. Why exactly 36 months? Why not look at the last 6 months to see the current state of affairs?
Because to prove causation, you need a massive historical baseline. You need to map out exactly how those specific suppliers priced their goods before the fintech platform and the virtual cards were introduced into the ecosystem. You need to understand their historical pricing behavior.
Ah, okay. You need to see what normal looked like.
Exactly. And finally, the fourth data point, which is the absolute linchpin of the entire audit. You need to extract the exact calendar date, the precise timestamp that the AP platform initiated virtual card payments for those specific top 10 suppliers.
Okay, let me recap so we're all on the same page. I have my raw materials. I have my read-only API access to the ERP. I have my top 10 whale suppliers. I have 3 years of their granular line item pricing history. And I have the exact go-live date for when we force them onto the vCard network. How do I synthesize this? What is the algorithm logic here? How do I build a template script to cross-reference this and find the parasite?
It is a 4-step correlation script. It is elegant in its directness. Step 1. You instruct the script to map the 36-month historical supplier pricing onto a chronological timeline. You track the unit cost of exactly what you buy on a recurring basis, for example, the price per ton of a specific standardized grade of aluminum.
Got it. I am visualizing a line chart. It is probably a fairly steady line, maybe rising slowly over the years, reflecting normal macroeconomic inflation, right?
Yes, just standard market fluctuation. Step 2. You isolate the specific month, the specific week that the vCards went live on that timeline. You program the script to drop a vertical pin on that exact date.
That is the moment the friction was introduced into the relationship.
Right. Step 3. You instruct the script to calculate the percentage price increase implemented by those exact suppliers in the immediate subsequent quarter, or upon their very next contract renewal cycle following the pin drop.
Now, this is where I have another major pushback. If I am tracking the price of aluminum over 3 years, and I see a price jump right after the vCard goes live, how do I know that jump isn't just the result of a global supply chain crisis or a new international tariff on metals? How do I isolate the vCard variable from the noise of the global economy?
That is the most critical question an auditor can ask, and it is exactly why Step 4, the validation signal, is designed the way it is. You are not looking for a random price increase. You are looking for a highly specific, mathematically unnatural signature.
What is the signature?
You are looking for a uniform, synchronized inflation variance of exactly 2.5% to 3.5% across multiple disparate suppliers who operate in entirely different industries.
Oh, I see. Wow.
Because if there is a tariff on aluminum, only the aluminum supplier raises their price. The logistics fleet doesn't care about the tariff. But if you look at your historical chart and you see normal erratic inflation for 3 years, and then right after the vCard pin drops, the unit cost of aluminum suddenly jumps by 3%, and the unit cost of your logistics contract jumped by 3%, and the unit cost of your chemical resins jumps by 3%.
The correlation is undeniable.
Yeah.
I mean, it is mathematically impossible for a global tariff, a fuel shortage, and a chemical supply issue to all result in an identical 3% price spike on the exact same date across unrelated industries.
Exactly. The thesis is definitively validated. You have mathematically isolated the hidden interchange inflation in your existing accounts payable ledgers.
I want to give the listener a really visceral, conceptual visual for this process, inspired by the creative prompts hidden in the source material. Imagine an overhead view of a stark white paper ledger resting on a cold industrial steel table. The clean black ink on the ledger represents your baseline supply chain costs. Then, a translucent black credit card slices violently down into the paper, and exactly where the edge of the card cuts the ledger, bright red ink begins to bleed outward into your line item costs.
It is a dramatic but highly accurate representation of the margin erosion.
And that API script we just built, that is the tool you use to find the exact millimeter where the cut was made. It removes all the guesswork. You aren't operating on a gut feeling anymore. You have the exact timestamp of the payment method change and the corresponding identical percentage spike in the supplier's unit price.
The data becomes irrefutable at that point. Once the internal auditor finds the specific variant signature, the invisible parasite is suddenly dragged into the light. It cannot be ignored by the executive team.
So we have successfully run the diagnostic. The X-ray is clear now. We can see the jagged white line of the fracture. The next, and honestly infinitely more difficult step, is fixing the bone. We have to take this mathematical truth to the negotiation table with our suppliers, and perhaps more terrifyingly, we have to take it into the boardroom. This requires serious strategy.
It requires a very specific phased operational pivot. If the internal API audit proves that the 3% inflation is real, that you are bleeding millions of dollars, you must execute 3 immediate actions to offset the impact of those interchange fees and reclaim the margin.
Let's walk through the triage. What is action 1?
Action 1 is blunt force. You kill the virtual cards for those specific high-volume top 10 suppliers immediately. You go into the fintech dashboard, you change the routing rules, and you stop the bleeding.
Okay, so you shut off the valve, but you still have to pay the aluminum supplier tomorrow morning. What is action 2? Because if you revert to mailing them a paper check, aren't you just plunging the enterprise right back into the stage 3 chaos we just spent millions of dollars to escape?
No, you do not regress to stage 3. Action 2 is to shift these specific high-volume suppliers back to zero cost, direct ledger-to-ledger protocols, but maintaining the automated infrastructure. This means reviewing their specific routing rules to standard ACH batch transfers. Or, if the supplier demands the speed of instant settlement that they had with the V card, you utilize the newer real-time payments, or RTP networks.
Let's briefly distinguish RTP from ACH because that is a vital technical nuance for a CFO.
Standard ACH is a batch process. The transactions are aggregated and settled in massive batches a few times a day. It can take 24 to 48 hours for the funds to actually clear. The real-time payments network is fundamentally different. It is a gross settlement system that clears individual transactions instantly, 247, 365 days a year.
So it provides the exact same instant cash flow benefit to the supplier as the V card.
Precisely. But here's the critical difference. An RTP transaction costs the enterprise roughly a few cents to execute, and it carries zero interchange fee for the supplier. You restore the frictionless transfer of capital, you maintain the speed, but you entirely remove the 3% tax levied by the credit card networks.
Okay, so we have stopped the bleeding and stabilized the patient. But we still have a massive problem. The supplier's baseline prices are still inflated from the last contract cycle. They are still charging us 103% for the aluminum, even though we are no longer forcing them to pay the interchange fee. How do we get the money back?
Which brings us to action 3, the hardest part of the entire process. You go back to the supplier, armed with the undeniable proof of the API audit data, and you aggressively renegotiate the base contract down by the exact 3% premium that was previously baked in.
You literally call up the supplier's VP of sales and say, look, we ran an audit. We know exactly what you did. We know you raised prices uniformly by 3% across the board to cover the V-card fee. We are removing the V-card requirement. Therefore, you are removing the 3% artificial price hike.
Exactly. It is an exercise in restorative engineering. You are collaboratively stripping the artificial payment friction out of the B2B relationship. You are telling them, we'll give you your 5% net margin back, but you have to give us our original unit pricing back. And for a bootstrapped enterprise or an aggressive internal audit team, this is where massive value creation occurs. The auditor literally recovers millions of dollars of lost capital.
It is pure value creation achieved simply by eliminating architectural waste. And we have to talk about the elephant in the room. The absolute biggest obstacle to executing this recovery protocol isn't the technology, and it isn't the supplier. It is the internal political bottleneck inside the enterprise.
You are referring to the CFO.
Yes, the CFO. We talked in the very beginning about how the 1% rebate was tied directly to the CFO's performance metrics. They celebrated this. They popped champagne over the new revenue generator. Now, you are asking that exact same CFO to walk into a boardroom, look the CEO and the board of directors in the eye, and admit that the brilliant digital transformation they spearheaded is actually a margin-destroying parasite. Revealing this 3% inflation threatens the CFO's internal credibility in their job. How does the CFO justify this massive pivot to the board without looking like an absolute fool who fell for a marketing trap?
It is entirely an exercise in high-stakes corporate psychology and narrative framing. The CFO must rapidly transition their persona from being a passive victim of fintech marketing to being an aggressive, highly sophisticated, data-driven defender of corporate margins. We can actually construct a strategic script, a series of nuanced talking points for the CFO to use in that exact board meeting.
Okay, let's role play this because the psychology here is just fascinating. I'm going to act as the skeptical, slightly aggressive chairman of the board. I'm looking at you over my reading glasses. You are the CFO. Give me your open and maneuver, point 1.
Point 1, the macro reality. You do not start with an apology. You say, board members, over the past fiscal year, we successfully executed a critical modernization of our accounts payable infrastructure. We moved from a highly vulnerable Stage 3 environment to a mature Stage 4 architecture. We eliminated paper, we achieved massive digital efficiency, and we vastly improved our security posture against ACH fraud. However, our ongoing proactive internal data auditing has revealed a structural mathematical flaw in the broader fintech market's incentive model.
Oh, that is a brilliant psychological pivot. You explicitly take credit for the operational modernization, reminding them that you fixed the fraud problem, but you assign the blame for the margin erosion to the macro market and the broader fintech incentive model. You frame it as a systemic industry issue that your brilliant auditing team uncovered rather than a personal failure of diligence. I buy it. What is point two?
Point 2, the net loss quantification. This is where you drop the undeniable mathematical truth on the table. You say, while our standard reporting dashboard shows we are generating a healthy 1% AP rebate, our recent deep-level API cross-referencing proves that our industrial suppliers are universally applying a 3% interchange premium to our base unit economics. The current system, while functionally secure, is causing a silent net 2% capital hemorrhage across our core heavy supply chain.
You use the phrase capital hemorrhage. That immediately wakes the board up. It triggers their fiduciary instincts. But you also validate the claim by stating that the API proved it. You are not asking them to trust a gut feeling. You are presenting hard, correlated data. The board is now alarmed, but they respect the analysis. How do you close the loop? Point 3. Point 3. Restorative engineering and immediate action. You close with the definitive solution. Therefore, effective immediately, I am initiating a targeted procurement margin recovery protocol. By shifting our high-volume vendors back to zero-cost ledger transfers and actively utilizing our audit data in all current contract renewals, we will aggressively strip this artificial payment friction from our operations. This pivot will recover a projected $12 million in procurement budget for this fiscal year capital that will drop straight back to our bottom line. It is a masterclass in corporate communication. It turns a massive potential embarrassment falling for the illusion of the 1% rebate into a proactive, highly strategic win for the executive team. The CFO is no longer the person who made a mistake. The CFO is the vigilant guardian who deployed advanced data auditing to find hidden money that the rest of the industry is blindly losing. It is about restoring fundamental truth to enterprise procurement.
Exactly. You are demonstrating supreme executive agility. When the underlying data changes, the strategy changes immediately. It projects strength, not weakness.
Okay, let's briefly recap the immense journey we have taken today, because we have covered a staggering amount of ground, from historical infrastructure to software engineering to corporate psychology. We started by looking at how to identify hidden interchange inflation in existing accounts payable ledgers.
We did. We began by analyzing the messy, incredibly physical evolution of accounts payable. We charted the painful progression from the manual paper checks of Stage 1 through the chaotic, reactive dabbling of Stage 2, and into the overwhelming risk, complexity, and fraud vulnerability of Stage 3.
Which we identified as the exact operational nightmare that created the perfect psychological conditions for a CFO to fall into the trap of Stage 4. That incredibly seductive, dangerous illusion of the 1% virtual card cashback rebate.
We then rigorously unpacked the physics of that trap. We traced the movement of the capital to show how the 1% rebate is actually funded by forcing a massive 3% interchange fee onto the receiving suppliers via the credit card networks. And we explored the unit economics to prove that those low-margin industrial suppliers have absolutely no choice but to force that cost right back onto the enterprise upon renewal, resulting in hidden systemic inflation and a devastating net 2% margin loss.
We analyzed the cybersecurity paradox, how deploying a secure token like a V-card might solve transmission vulnerability, but simultaneously increases the enterprise's exposure to social engineering by fostering blind trust in automated opaque dashboards.
And crucially, we provided the exact technical blueprint for the API audit. We detailed how to map 36 months of historical line item pricing data, isolate the precise V-card implementation timestamp, and mathematically prove the uniform 3% price spike to separate the signal from macroeconomic noise.
Armed with that irrefutable truth, we gave the CFO the exact psychological boardroom script to kill the V-cards, revert to frictionless ACH or RTP networks, aggressively renegotiate the supplier contracts, and reclaim millions in lost capital without sacrificing their own executive credibility. It is a profound application of first principles thinking to corporate finance.
And that specific concept, first principles thinking, the act of stripping away the interface and looking at the raw mechanics of the system, is exactly where we need to end our analysis today. Because if you truly understand the underlying mechanism of what we just discussed, you realize this dynamic is not confined to accounts payable.
Right. It forces you to look at the entire corporate structure and ask, where else is this exact same pattern happening?
Prasad Bonde's manifesto leaves the reader with a set of what he calls expanded strategic targets. We just applied rigorous, skeptical data auditing to financial ledgers to find a hidden, margin-destroying bottleneck. But where else is artificial friction or unexamined risk hiding in your enterprise architecture right this very second?
I mean, think about the massive, frantic rush across every industry right now to adopt generative AI into daily workflows.
Exactly. Every executive wants the efficiency gains of AI. But look beneath the interface. Are your software engineers routinely routing highly sensitive proprietary corporate data, perhaps unreleased source code or customer data, through public large language model endpoints just to generate boilerplate code faster? Is the seductive convenience of an AI copilot causing an invisible, massive intellectual property leak? In that scenario, the control point isn't the CFO, it is the individual software engineer sitting at their desk. If you ran a rigorous audit on outbound API token requests to public LLMs, what terrifying hemorrhage of intellectual property would you actually find?
Or consider the massive rise of the citizen developer. You have non-technical middle managers using intuitive, low-code platforms to build custom shadow IT applications simply because they don't want to wait 6 months for the official IT department to build a tool for them. They are bypassing all the established cybersecurity gateways because the interface makes it feel safe and easy. If you apply the exact same rigorous skeptical API auditing mindset we just used on financial ledgers to your company's actual data pipelines, what other massive invisible leaks might you find hiding in plain sight behind a beautiful dashboard?
The broader lesson here is really about the danger of abstraction. When a vendor abstracts away the complexity of a system and presents you with a simple, rewarding interface, they are almost certainly extracting value from you in a way you cannot immediately perceive.
It is a terrifying but ultimately exhilarating thought process. The diagnostic X-ray machine of modern enterprise software might be intentionally broken or misleading, but you possess the tools to build your own diagnostic imaging from scratch. You just have to know exactly where to look, you have to understand the fundamental physics of the system, and you have to be willing to follow the raw data, even when it directly contradicts the beautiful, clean narrative the vendor sold you. Keep asking the incredibly hard questions. Keep looking for the hidden friction in your systems. Thank you so much for joining us on this deep dive.
Remember, the ultimate truth is always in the ledger. You just have to be brave enough to extract it.